Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or whenever you're watching this Zoomcast from the Harvest Foundation, which we call Jesus' Hands and Feet. And the purpose of our Zoomcast is to encourage those of you who are watching to listen to the stories of brothers and sisters who have allowed their hands and feet to be used by Jesus to touch those in need. And we want you to be not impressed by what you hear, but to be encouraged to ask yourself the question, what can I do today to allow Jesus to use me, to use my hands and feet as his hands and feet to touch those in the world who need to be touched today? So I'm with my co-host, Julian Gibb. Give us a high sign, Julie. And Julian and I have known each other for about 7 years from Camelback Bible Church in Phoenix. And he's co-hosting with me, and our guest in this particular interview is Trish. And Trish, how do you pronounce your last name?
Everybody asks that question. Karpurk, like a car and a percolator.
Okay, Karpurk. Okay, got it. Okay. Well, Trish has been the director of Celebrate Recovery here in Phoenix, and it's been a part of her church, Christ Church. So, Trish, we're interviewing you to basically have you tell us your story. So why don't you begin by sharing with us what Celebrate Recovery is and what its objectives are?
Okay, well, Celebrate Recovery, we say, is for anyone struggling with a hurt, habit, or hang-up. So pretty much it encompasses most of us, right? And it's not just about drugs or alcohol. It's really about the brokenness in our lives, and that the pathway to healing and to freedom and to living a life of victory is through Jesus. And so it's a Christ-centered 12-step program. So if you think of AA or NA, one of those 12-step programs, and you literally bring Jesus in, because Jesus really was at the beginning of all of those. When those programs all began, they actually began in a Bible study. For anybody that doesn't know, that 12-step programs began in a Bible study. And so many of them have taken Jesus out. Celebrate Recovery put Jesus back in. And so it's about whatever is stopping you from living the life that God's designed you to live, and that pathway to surrendering to him, to bringing him into the midst of your past, present, and most especially your future.
How many years has Celebrate Recovery been in Phoenix?
Well, it's been at our church. It was at our church for 14 plus years. It was begun, I think, close to 30 years ago at Saddleback Church in California. That's where it began. Okay. And it's in about 30,000 churches around the world right now.
Okay. So this is not unique to your church here in Phoenix.
Not at all.
Sort of
not
a local, yeah. Mm-hmm. And how many people have gone through Celebrate Recovery at your church?
Thousands. Any given night, there would be a couple of hundred men, women, and children. And every Thursday night, we've met every Thursday night for 14 plus years, except for, like Thanksgiving. And so literally thousands of people have gone through it, and some touched more than others, some healed more than others, but anybody that shows up, we know that God is at least planting seeds.
Right. Yeah, I have a curiosity about part of the process of recovery. And that curiosity is related to this. In my experience of working with delinquent kids in the inner city for 12 years, one of the things that I discovered or that we discovered as a team, was that that one of the quickest processes or ways or paths to recovery was to reach out to help other people. And I'm wondering, did you see any, or was that a part of your program of recovery, or did that play a part in the recovery process and Celebrate Recovery?
Right from the start, that was part. I mean, we didn't begin, honestly, thinking that this was going to be anything other than, God's calling us to this in this moment. And 8 people in my living room is where it began.
Okay.
And so we were not expecting anything other than taking the limits off of God. God can do whatever he wants to. We're just going to step out in faith. But almost immediately what we saw was that, to be perfectly honest, the people within the church did not come. Okay, because nobody wanted to be identified as one of those people.
One of the unwashed, huh?
Yeah, exactly. The ones that Jesus actually came for, right?
Right.
So,
Yes.
but almost immediately, people outside the church started coming. And so very quickly, within the first probably month that we were going, God really put it on our heart that we needed to provide childcare so that, single moms, single dads, they could come and so we added that in. We had dinner for everybody and no charge for 14 plus years. We served, and I mean, people still talk about the great meals that were served, because we had great people in the kitchen who would cook, teams of people who would cook each week and serve. So people came, and you know how God does things. He uses very mixed motives. Some people came for a free meal. Some people came so that they didn't have their kids for for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And yet God used those things to draw them in and to have them keep coming. Literally, the children some weeks would be the only reason the parents showed up, because the kids would be at their door saying, "It's Thursday night, let's go to Celebrate Recovery." And so, God uses all those things. And so it literally became, our pastor said a number of years ago, he said that Celebrate Recovery gave us credibility in our community, that we actually care about this community outside of our church.
Trish, that was going to be one of my questions, is why did you start? Why do this?
Why stop?
Why start? Why did you start?
Why did I start? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So why did I start? I am the daughter of an alcoholic. And so I come from brokenness, great brokenness. And I thought that when I left my home of origin, that I left all that behind. And I had no idea that I was actually carrying a backpack filled with things that I had never dealt with, never brought God into it, because if I ran from it, then it wasn't there. And then we reached a time in our family's life where our youngest went down a path of alcohol at 14, 15 years old. And we weren't able to, I knew something was going on because I actually had worked in that area. And so knowledge didn't change what was happening. Right? Did all the things I knew to do. Can I tell you, I brought her for Christian counseling. I, monitored things. We were really close. She was always at church with me, helping in the homeless community with me. All of those things were present. And yet it was like watching a train wreck about to happen, and I couldn't do anything about it. And
this was in your own family.
Yes.
And you were vocationally, or at least avocationally, working in this field.
Yeah.
And all of your knowledge couldn't do anything about it.
No.
Wow.
No.
So what made the difference?
Yeah, what made the
made
difference?
the difference? You know what made the difference? I actually learned through the process of Celebrate Recovery, to be honest. I learned what it really means to surrender.
Explain that.
Well, can you imagine watching your 15-year-old nearly die, right? And to be walking into the emergency room after the EMTs had come to your home and taken her practically lifeless there. And as I walked into the emergency room, God brought back a Bible verse that I grew up on the wall of my school. And it said, train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not depart from it. And it was God just giving me an assurance that, you know what, it's okay. I've got you and I've got her. And I wish I could say that was all I needed. And from that day forward, I just surrendered, but it was not like that at all. I was not like the rapid learner in this walk. I was the one that he had to constantly come to and say, it's okay, I've got you, I've got her, I've got all of this. And so I learned that journey, and I learned that when God said surrender, even though the thoughts in my head were saying one thing, I had to trust that surrender meant don't try to control what's going on. If God wants me to step out and do something, he's going to make it clear. And so that kind of encapsulates my journey about surrender. It was actually a moment-by-moment trust walk with God that I had never experienced. You know, I knew the Lord, I loved the Lord, served the Lord. And I had never been in that place of having to surrender my every moment to him.
How did it change you, this surrender?
So as much as I knew, loved, and served the Lord, I was truly lacking in intimacy with him. And that began a love relationship with God, like a relationship, not me just loving my God, but in relationship with him that has literally like changed me from the inside out. And it has given me a peace and a confidence, no confidence in me, but total confidence that he's got me. And Amen. That I'm good. When he says, I want you to step out, I'm good with it. You know what? That's all I need to know is that he's calling me to it. And I'm just going to be obedient to it. And he's shown me again and again and again his faithfulness.
Wow.
So that daughter, by the way, has, so we began Celebrate Recovery, and I began that journey of letting go. She began her journey of recovery. And so she has, 15 years of sobriety.
How's she? Yeah, amen. How's she doing?
She's doing great. She's an awesome woman. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah.
Praise God.
Yay, God. Yes.
So,
go ahead, Julian.
So with the course, the Celebrating Recovery, many courses, as you said, they don't have Jesus involved in the mix, as it were. Right. So why do you? What's if other people are doing without Jesus? Why do you see a need to bring him in?
Well, first of all, Celebrate Recovery. That is the groundwork of it. Like apart from Jesus, listen. I know I have seen sober people who are still miserable, angry, just living their lives without drugs or alcohol. I've seen people, and we all know, people who are forget alcohol and drugs, who are just living in fear, living in judgment, all of those things. Apart from Christ, there's no healing. There's just managing behavior, ultimately.
Well, you talked about in the beginning of Celebrate Recovery at Christ Lutheran that the people of the church didn't
Right.
or they want to be associated with the quote unquote unwashed. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did the church ever then become interested in what you're doing? And if so, how did that happen? And the reason I'm asking that is that we're hoping that pastors are watching this.
Mm-hmm.
And, before we started the broadcast, I was talking to you a little bit about my background. I loved the church growing up,
Mm-hmm.
but in seminary, I came to despise the church in seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, what? In seminary? Yeah, well, why, Bob? And it was exactly that reason. The church that I grew up in, at least in the city where I was going to seminary, talked a good game, but they didn't live it. Not outside the congregation. So how did it happen? Or did it happen? And if so, how did it happen?
So I believe that God will always use a broken-hearted person to be a change agent. And one of the first people within our church that he used was just a lovely, lovely woman who was just, one of those saints, just in a great place in her walk and mature in her walk. And she showed up because she had a son who was struggling for many years. And she related to what I had said about my journey. And so that brought her to attend. And it wasn't long in her time there. I bet it wasn't more than a few months. And I literally was sitting across the table from her in one of our open share groups. And I could see this like revelation. She got it. She understood surrender. She understood that Jesus had, and literally, like, it changed her walk with her son, with her husband, with God, and she became, there's nothing like a changed life. So that that was like an entrance into the church.
Okay. And so today, is the church really involved, not just in Celebrate Recovery, but in the general idea of being, each member being hands and feet of Jesus?
You know what, I have to say, our church has been, in a lot of ways, a very passionate model for loving your community. We Celebrate Recovery, people, we had drivers, we have people helping in the nursery holding babies, we had people working passionately with our kids who, come from broken homes and they need lots and lots of extra love and attention. We have people who literally cooked and cleaned, and worship bands who came in and volunteered for 14 years. And that's only because people were actually seeing lives changed. And so I remember when it was our 5th anniversary, and we celebrated for the first time as part of the Sunday services. And it was a breakthrough into our church. So I want you to picture this, because, kind of Celebrate Recovery had been a program that was encouraged and supported by our pastor from day one, okay, and really supported. And so that 5th anniversary said, let's bring it to church on Sunday. And so what we did was, instead of a sermon, we basically did cardboard testimonies. You familiar with those? So
No.
just to give an idea of what they are. So people come up with basically like a handwritten piece of cardboard, and it says where they were in their life. Let's say, abused, forgotten, etc. And then they turn it over on the other side, and Jesus found me and healed me. you know, drug addict for 14 years and then, you know, set free, you know, living a life of purpose and dignity, things like that. And so we literally, that's how we did our 5th anniversary, was in the church. Now, and we have traditional services and we have contemporary services. But the most powerful thing was going into the traditional church, into the sanctuary, with these like amazing former drug addicts, former prostitutes, former, and every one of them with their cardboard, and every one of them like turning it over and people getting to see what Jesus did. And I'm telling you, I've never experienced this in our traditional church. At the end of that, people like stood up and cheered. Like that has never happened in a traditional church.
How has it affected your church? You know, so Jesus is using you to reach out to members of the community. Originally, the church was sort of like, oh no, we're perfect here. There's nothing wrong here. But so members of the outside community came in, and Jesus has transformed those lives, as you just said. But how did it change your church? You know, especially the traditional service, as you say. You know, how did the church culture change?
Well, the passion to serve in Celebrate Recovery was lit on fire then. And so the church became, especially, and I would tell you, especially in the traditional service, they came to support this ministry. Mm-hmm. So they came to cook, to help with the children, to love on babies, to drive, to do, you know, what it took. I mean, people from the contemporary services too, but I would say there was a much bigger push that came from the traditional services. And it sort of ignited a passion, I think, that was, you know, kind of laying there maybe a little dormant. And not just about Celebrate Recovery, but homeless ministries began. We began serving families through our Christ Cares ministries. A whole program called Christ Cares for Kids began, where we helped families in need every Monday and Wednesday for many years now, to give them literally physical resources, diapers, wipes, formula, things like that, and to bring them into relationship and to see how we can actually minister to them as a family. You know, just like all different kinds of ways that you could see like God was pulling in from here and here and here, and gifts and talents that people had, that they were letting God actually use them to reach a lost and dying world.
What would you say to a pastor or anyone really who's listening now and is thinking, you know, we need to do something like this? These are real members of not only the broader community, but our own church, who are struggling in silence. You know, there's a taboo, you know, we're Christians, we've got our act together, you know, due to Christ, we're perfect. It's the others that have these problems, you know. What would you say to pastors and Christian leaders who are thinking, we need to do something like this, but I don't know where to start?
You know, one of the beautiful things about whether it's Celebrate Recovery or whatever God calls them to, is that really what I've learned is that if He puts a burden on our heart, just step out and start doing something. And God will redirect if we're not going in the way. But man, because God redirected us a number of times about how we were doing things. In fact, He recently redirected us yet again about recovery. And of course, in this season of COVID and everything's changed up yet again. And so we have to minister differently to our community. And we had to be flexible, and we have to use technology more than we would in the past. And but step out and do something. God will bless that. That is what I know. I've seen it again and again. Our homeless ministry started with, you know, like 10 people maybe. And man, that just took off.
Mm.
just took off, and people really were passionate about like going and ministering and serving in whatever ways they could. And our Christ Cares for Kids, the same thing. It just took off, and
Trish,
people. Go ahead.
We've talked so far this morning about programs.
Mm-hmm.
And sounds wonderful, excited. I want to come to your church. And but programs are one thing. Tell us what are some stories that you personally have been involved in where you've seen God use you to be
So
him in the
not
life
through the
of others?
program you're speaking of, like outside of the program or within the program?
It could be within. I just, it's one thing we talk about the programs that we're
Right.
involved in. I want those who are watching to see how God has used Trish, not to start a program,
Okay. Yeah.
but in the lives of individual people.
So I would actually say, there are places that we can go to where we actually limit what God can do because we think we have to have this all together, And so recently what happened, it's very interesting because I sort of have, I'll tell you a very personal side of this. I have this general policy that I don't give money to people who are like sitting at stoplights and sitting outside the Walgreens or things like that, because I've lived in the area of recovery now for years, and I know where most of the money will go to, and I know that won't benefit them. And so I'll, have conversation or this or that, but I won't normally give out money. I was just recently, and this is like perfect that God did this. I was going into a store and I saw a man sitting outside the thing, and he was obviously strung out on something and just laying on the ground. And so I went in, got what I needed in the store, and exited the store, got into my car, and as I got into my car, I was facing where that man was. And God whispered to me, I want you to go over to him, and I want you to pay him $20 for 20 minutes of his time. Now, I almost, trust me when I tell you this, I almost said, God, you know my policy. So, but I didn't, I held back. The thought was there, God knew it. So I did. And, went over and chatted with him for a bit and found out where he was in his journey and offered, like, you want a different life, God has a different life for you. This is not what God is calling you to, okay? God specifically, the moment I said, I was ready to just drive out, but God told me, God had his eyes on you. And he told me to come and do this because he wants you to know that he has a plan for your life and he loves you and you're not too far gone. Like it is not true that your life can't be redeemed. And so and he got really honest with me, and he's like, I'm not ready to give this up yet, the drugs. I'm like, thank you for being honest. I'm like, but he is there when you are ready. He's there. And so I said to him, I said, can I pray for you? Now he had been kind of like laying on the ground and all these things. When I said, can I pray for you? He like jumped to his feet and he took off his cap that he was wearing and he bowed his head and he folded his hands. And it was like a child coming to God. Like just, so you know what, when I think of like all of the things and all of the programs and whatnot, but that to me is just like, that's what God, anybody can do that. It doesn't take a program.
Wow.
Amen.
Trish, thank you. Thank you. I think one of the takeaways that I'd like our viewers to notice is that we don't see the conclusion of these kinds of things. God is not asking us to wrap up the package and present it to him in a bowed box. He's just saying, be me right now, in this instance, and don't worry about what comes afterwards. This is a process. I want you to be obedient now. And don't think about closing the deal, but just allow me to work through you in this moment. Trish, thank you. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, as we close, I want to just say there are many other interviews that you can watch and see. It's on harvestfoundation.org, and go to the resource tab. And at the bottom of the resource tab is a link that says Jesus Hands and Feet. Go there and you'll find lots of interviews. But as we close, my challenge to you is go before the Lord right now and say, Lord, how can you use me today? God bless you. Have a great day.